Oh, it's doing its thing. Hello, good morning, Charlie, and welcome to Virtual Coffee. How are you this morning, Charlie? Val here from Val Her Media talking about podcasting. How are you doing, Charlie?
Doing awesome. I'm so happy to be here. We've had so many little conversations back and forth and chatted
We
about
have.
podcasting and outsourcing and property and all kinds of things. And I'm
Excellent.
thrilled we
Yeah.
get to do this today.
Excellent. I love having you here. I love the rock star sort of background that you have. I always have, I say podcasting, what's it called? Not anxiety, but it's admiration for the way that you've set it up. And this is the thing, like podcasting is not just about audio now. It's like people can see you podcasting. So I'm really keen to find out a little bit more about how people were wanting to get into the podcasting space. But let's talk about you, Charlie. How did you get into the space? Tell us a little bit about how you got into the media space and why you've decided to sort of focus on the podcasting industry.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is because it had such a good an effect on me. Like I drink the Kool-Aid. I'm a big podcast listener, but the abstracted and longer and probably more entertaining version of that is that once upon a time, I actually used to be a plumber. So I'm actually a qualified plumber, did my licenses, went through that
Yeah.
whole process. But when I was plumbing, the way I kind of made my move into the business world is I was listening to podcasts to and from work
Right.
every day. So I was listening, I'm like learning and taking, I'd pull over on the side of the road and like, oh, I just learned this thing. And it was a really fun experience. So podcasting was actually my ticket to starting to understand the business world and how things worked. And it created this bit of a bridge where when I came into the world of business that I was much more adept. So I was always
Mm,
being a really, really big podcast fan in general. But
mm,
then what really put the nail in the coffin for me? So what made the jump in itself? I used to run a marketing agency and I was a guest on a big podcast. And what kind of happened is once the episode of my podcast on this show came out, I remember in the next week some people come for a sales call. Now, I don't know if you've ever done sales at all or ever had to do hard closing or any of that, but I'm like preparing for war before a podcast, before a sales call. I'm like, all right, it's going to be an hour. All right, I've got my script. I'm ready for my objections. And like, this guy, he come at me. And then the guy came on the call and he's like, hey, he's like, I heard you on this podcast. You were speaking about, well, at the time, remarketing. He's like, I want that. Can we just do that? And I'm like,
oh, I didn't have to. Where's your objection?
this isn't in the script.
We've gone straight down to the bottom where it says, yeah, give me what you have.
Yeah, so that was the really, really interesting thing is that the realization is that the podcast I recorded weeks ago had just done all the heavy lifting in being able to convert people from not knowing me at all into having some trust and admiration around me where it was enough for them to be comfortable to buy from me. And in that moment, I said, well, why would I ever want to go through the harder process again? And it feels quite, I mean, this is just my opinion. I'm not going to necessarily go out and badmouth the industry or anything. There's a lot of salespeople out there that do awesome. But for me, I was like, why would I go through this? Something that I'm not that great at. I enjoy, but I'm not the best salesperson in the world. There's much better people at it when I can do this and it would make my life so much more easier and enjoyable. So I elected to go that path and go deep on podcasting. So from there, I grew a couple of my own big shows and then people started tapping me on the shoulder and being like, oh, I want that. Can you do that for me? And then after enough people were running podcasts for, I was like, it's time to turn this into a business. So Valor Media was kind of through that whole segue. That's how I ended up with the media company.
Yeah, fantastic. And why was it sort of the platform? I sort of go, and I've seen people and they'll be like the lollipop person or someone in construction, and they're sitting there, and it has occurred to me many times. I'm like, how many people of these people are listening to podcasts? Because sometimes you sort of go, well, you say you're doing stuff and you're listening to something, so you're absorbing and you're learning at the same time. I really like that because it's what people people are using what we would probably coin as downtime or quiet time to actually be learning things. And podcasting has, like you said, exploded in that space. I really like that. And why have you sort of just chosen to keep in the podcasting, whether it's Spotify or whichever, or moved out to other platforms as well?
So this is where the podcasting space gets really interesting, in my opinion. So originally when I got into it, it was just audio. And much like you said, particularly truck drivers and people who do stacking of shelves like at Safeway or Coles
Yeah,
overnight, they are hitting it hard. They are listening to podcasts all day, every day, and they
yeah, I
do it
guess.
instead of like radio. So that definitely existed. But then there's a rather famous person now where a guy called Joe Rogan started doing his podcast on video. Now he's had just a massive effect on the podcast industry, where he kind of said that he wanted to do his as video, and he kind of coined the idea of turning a podcast not just into an audio version, but creating a video experience. And we've just seen knock-on effect after knock-on effect. So what I think has happened, and I'm not saying this is, putting it all on Joe here. I'm sure there's other people that have done an exceptional job, but he's the one who kind of normalized it. And over the last particularly 3 years, it's become more and more common. The other side of that is that if you're going to go to the effort of doing a podcast, it's really not that much more effort to do the video. So there's this massive okay, I do a little bit extra work, like I get a camera and I get all these extra advantages. Well, that's a good deal.
Yeah,
Why would I not do that? Like why, if there's the ability for me to create so much more value, give people different ways to enjoy the interviews depending on what they do. Like some people hate watching podcasts. They'll never watch an interview. Myself, I love watching an interview. Me and my wife, and well, in the evenings, I laugh at this now, but it's like, how much do you share? But we'll sit down and watch interviews on topics and debate them and talk about them. And we'll literally engage in different mediums rather than watching the news or things that just aren't relevant to us anymore. So there's so many different experiences that exist now that just weren't common 3 years ago.
Yeah, and that's so cool because you think about it's just you're leveraging and being more efficient with your time anyhow. And I'm probably on the flip side because I do quite a few Facebook lives, but Charlie,
No, we call
I
you pretend podcasters. That's
yeah,
what
pretend podcasters. That'll be me because I haven't dived into the podcast space, but I just go, well, this is exactly what you're doing already. I need to be leveraging into that space. And then it's also the mindset thing because I think I sound like a chipmunk, but that's on another side, But I think again, people who are looking to get themselves out there in the social media spaces, consider how you can leverage your time through different medias. Like I said, from here you can do a Facebook Live. It can be converted into podcast. So that's at least two. So how much more reach are you getting in that sense? Um, uh, Charlie, give us some really good tips for people who are looking to get into this. And I met a gentleman the other day, and he's like, "Oh, I'm talking about commercial leasing." There's so many. I mean, it's a really competitive market now. How do you get yourself out there and stand out in the crowd where there's just so much?
Okay, so I'll go through some things here that I think are really important for anyone who's considering doing a podcast. And then even if you've got a podcast and you're maybe not getting the results you hoped for, some of these will likely apply. So if you started 5 years ago, you could pretty much pick any niche and the chance of you being successful are substantially higher than they would be today. Because when something works, what tends to happen is more people jump onto it. And the more people that jump onto it, the less opportunity is created in that same way. And you can look at this in so many things where it's like, the people that got on Facebook early, I was one of those people. It was a gold mine. We were terrible, but we thought we were geniuses. I'm going to do an image with a red border and people will buy from me. And it worked.
Today?
No chance. People would get this spam offer here and stop showing me photos of your food.
Yeah, that's it.
But it's a very, very different environment. So early adoption always has an advantage. So the first thing I would say is that when you look at this today, and I think about blue oceans and red oceans, number one thing is you've got to have a niche. If you create a broad show, so if you tried to just go, I'm going to do a money show, or I'm going to do a business show, or I'm going to do a health show, because there's not enough substance to a niche within that, you're going to have a very hard time. And I kid you not, I ordered a lot of podcasts. So more often than not, people will come to me to review their show and tell them what they can do to improve it. It's very rare that this doesn't get mentioned. People have a massive objection to this and I look at it and I go like, you're not getting the result. Like there's no upside in staying where you are. Niching down is the way to do it. So hyper niche is where it is today. And then the second component of that is discoverability. So this is where we've done some really different things at Valor Media, and we've done a big push on video. Video is still a very blue ocean. There's a lot of room for good video shows that are available in many niches, where if you did that same show and it was audio only, I think you would have a hard time getting it off the ground. So that would be my first way of thinking about it. Go hyper niche and do video would be the first two things. But now I'm going to say probably something that people often get offended by. I think there's this real obsession of podcasters to make the content they want to make instead of the content people want to consume. And I'll give you an example is if you think about Game of Thrones, the smash hit TV series, like literally, like TV's never been busier. There's never been more options. If they published an episode tomorrow, people would cancel their plans to watch it. Like they would. They're obsessive and they're into it and they're looking at it in that way because people want it. They've got this huge desire for it. Where if I tried to, I'm going to start a medieval show tomorrow and publish it, how many people are really going to come after that? Probably no one. Probably wouldn't be very good either.
Depends on what you're wearing, Charlie, maybe.
I would make it at least very entertaining in my perspective, but there's a real obsession towards this. So the unfair advantage of what good podcasters do today is they make sure they're actually talking about the things that the market wants to hear from. And we both, like I have many shows I look after in the investing and property space, and I know you're semi-familiar with it, but the common one is like, if you're a beginner, do you know what you love? You love the monthly updates. Like you love to know, oh my God, did Perth go up by 1%? Oh, that's amazing. What's a vacancy rate? But people that have been in property for a long time, they're often really over and sick of talking about that. So they start talking about these other things, or they'll look into other areas of that just aren't as relevant to the audience because they're trying to follow their own interest rather than they're trying to support what the market actually wants. And it's a supply and demand thing, but I really, really heavily think this is one of the opportunity areas of like, if you're making truly exceptional content that an audience wants, it's the easiest game in the world. It really is. And all the growth strategies work in that same way.
And so how does it work in terms of people finding you? So you got Google AdWords and keywords and things like that. Is it a similar thing when it comes to podcasting and people finding your podcast?
Yeah, great question. I love that question. So this is the way I think about podcast growth today is you start with audience first. Okay, so if I was going to start a podcast that was very focused on fitness, really I'd be looking to probably spend a lot of time on Instagram and YouTube. Mm-hmm. If I was looking to start a podcast that was very focused on high level of executives, I'd be very focused on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So I always think that it's less about like, oh, should we do Google? And more about, well, where does the right person already live? And then what's the best way to capture them? So as it stands currently, we do Facebook ads. We do a lot of them. We do a lot of YouTube ads at the moment, do Instagram ads. We do LinkedIn ads. Like we're very focused on those strategies. We like to pay to play. We're very of the idea that if we can just pay you to find our ideal person and bring them to our podcast, let's do it. Like, let's not muck around. Like, why would I take years of spamming social media on every platform in the hope that someone will find a post who's the perfect one from here and the Facebook gods or social media gods will grace me in it actually being seen and getting some reach on that? I just think it's a huge waste of time.
Yeah. And while in the meantime, there's you're paying overhead costs, your operating costs, staff and everything else. So that's costing you as well. Might as well actually invest in it actively driving to your podcast. So tell me from a podcast perspective, how do people monetize podcasts?
Yeah, so my favorite way and what I think is the best way is to monetize it yourself, be your own back end, so to speak. So I look at this and go, if you have a business and you can create a podcast that would create the perfect client or buyer for your business, like that's undoubtedly going to be one of the best ways to do it. And I highly recommend it. It's what 80% of the clients at Valor Media do. Really, a podcast supports their course, their product, their service. Like that's what it's designed for. For the other side of things, the other methods that come up that I like quite well as well is affiliate. So what this means is, for example, if I started a show in property and I don't actually sell properties, I don't do anything in property, what I would do is actually recommend other people's services and then they would take, we would do a deal where I would receive a commission for the people that I was bringing across with my show. I have some friends that is their main model, and they crush it, not in the property space, but in a marketing niche.
Yeah.
It is a phenomenally lucrative and great way to do it, where you don't have to have your own team or business if that's the way to go. Now, my least favorite and the least effective and the biggest waste of time is sponsors. Like, in most cases, the rates, unless you have a substantially big show, are just not worth it. And there's very, very little upside in them. Like, I haven't been able to come across one person where sponsorships has been the thing that pays their bills. They've always had to do something else.
Yeah, the affiliate one is interesting, because that was sort of the whole thing with websites and blogs for such a long time. Like, get a whole lot of affiliate links. What's an example of a podcast that's done that really well that we can go stalk?
Ooh, a good one to stalk. So I think James Schramko and Superfast Business, his podcast, he does an excellent job of this. He's very, very good at that. I think he's a great example. Hustle and Flowchart with two guys called Matt and Joe. They are the ones I was speaking about. They do a very, very good affiliate model and sell other people's services and link through from there. So that would be the best two. They may not be relevant to the person here, but I think you can appreciate the business models.
Yeah, and I think that's it's always good to be able to extract from that and go, hey, I hadn't even thought about that, because it's at the end of the day, business, if you can, and anything else, if you've got numerous streams of income, that's the key thing that's going to keep your business sustainable.
So,
Yeah, and so Charley, what are the podcasts that you have? Give us a little bit of insight.
as in me personally, or the ones we look after?
No, that you personally have.
Yeah, so I started a podcast called The Business of Podcasting. The reason is that I felt there was a huge gap in the market for people that were able to turn a podcast into a business.
Yeah.
So on that show, I only talk about three things: how to grow a podcast, how to make great podcast content, and then how to monetize a podcast. And I've done my research to know that market wants that. Hint, hint, going back to our earlier point. But that is the main show I work on and a part of. I'm also a co-host on a property investing podcast in Australia with a good friend of mine, Goose, which I appear on. I say I'm a occasional co-host. I don't spend a lot of time there, but again, I'm on at least once a month, which is good fun. And then I'm also on another podcast in the niche website space.
Niche website space. What's that about?
So it's mostly about buying and selling websites. So I go on there now, many years of online. It's a good friend of mine, Jared, if he ever sees this, but it's been a really good experience to go on and co-host there occasionally as well. But I've got two new shows in the works as well that I'm working on right now, which I'm thrilled to be releasing soon.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So like the business of podcasting, and like you said, the 101 of marketing, you've mentioned a few times, niching, really going in a real big ocean of businesses, like really fine tune it down to something, or the type of target market that you're really wanting to attract, and being really clear about that. So say, for example, with we'll go back to plumbing. Say, for example, is it possible that that's just a niche, or is there an opportunity to super niche that as well?
Okay, plumbing would probably be a harder one, but this is how I would do it. If I was a plumber, there would be a few different shows that I would think is really good. Is one, I would do a show on good plumbing. So for a lot of plumbers, it's a very technical field. I remember being in this. If I today was a plumber and I'm like, oh, I've got this new hot water service, I've got no idea how to put this in, and someone's got a really good podcast on how to put this in quickly so I can make money, I am in. Right. And I think that type of, we'll call it good plumbing show, could be really great for someone who's looking to maybe attract staff or be seen as a leader in the industry.
Yeah. Or even the business of plumbing, that sort of thing, where they're teaching plumbers how to grow their businesses as well.
So that was my next one, is like a business related show for plumbers, like the business education. Like, I've gone through it. I did the trade school of running a business and plumbing, and no offense to my teachers, they were lovely, but that course they run on how to run a plumbing business is terrible.
Please take note. Take note. Yeah.
Take note. It is a prescription of bankruptcy, I'm pretty sure, but we'll come back to that point. but there's a real lack of people showing how to run good trade businesses, and particularly plumbers have some unique characteristics where that's a nice hyper niche show. I would like that as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Then lastly, I would do a renovations. I would do bathroom renovations. And I would make that as like, if you're someone who's thinking of doing a bathroom renovation, and I know that's a really common thing in Australia, renovations are huge, that would be a show where a consumer could view it, and then that might actually be for client work, so to speak.
and that would be an audio and a video as well. Well, I
Definitely.
guess if everyone wanted to do audio and video. And how do you do that if I'm thinking in that instance, right? You'd be doing bathroom renovations, but you're like moving around and stuff. How do you convert? Because I think of podcasting and I'm like, it's a static sort of someone sitting there. And maybe, this is just being a little bit, you've just got to go, well, let's break the mold. Well, what's to stop someone from actually be moving around and actually doing a podcast when they're showing people things, because you're on video anyhow. So I think it's more so thinking outside the box of what you're able to do in the audio and the visual space in terms of marketing yourself
I love
now.
that point so much.
Yeah.
There's a bias in podcasting that podcasts are interviews.
Yes.
And I think that is broken. So to give you an example, if you're a plumber and you're doing a renovation podcast and you're going to do a bathroom reno, if it was me, this is what I would do. So step one is I would talk to the potential client about what they want, and I would record it, go through the brief of what they're talking about. I'd literally share the design component. Then the construction component, I would talk through why we're doing things, how it's all coming together. And I would shoot it in the bathroom. I'd get a tripod, put a phone on, and I would record it from it. So it looks like it's like, oh, this guy's like into it, and you get to be a part of the experience. And then the last episode, I would do a completion, talk through what went well, what didn't get well, the hurdles, how you worked around things. I look at that and I go, that is such a unique podcast. Just no one else is doing. And let's just, again, look at this as the example we've spoken about earlier. If every other plumber's doing a boring interview podcast and there's this guy doing a month deep dive across start to finish with visuals, and that's his show, I know which one I'm listening to.
Yeah, I mean, you can't help. It's like a movie. You sort of go, what's going to happen at the end? Like it's the suspense. So I think that's great. So like even for myself, who is not doing podcasts, I'm going, how do you stand out from the other podcasts that are out there? And there's still opportunities. It's just understanding how do you super niche? How do you get, how do you really identify the pain points that your audience are experiencing or what they're wanting to see, and then maybe doing something that's a bit different to the norm.
Hugely
Well.
so. Different is a great way to think about it.
Yeah. In terms of setup, podcasting setup, the basic things that you need to have on hand.
Yeah, this is a really interesting time. Part of the reason why podcasting has got so big is that once upon a time, the setup I have now would have probably cost, or an equivalent setup of what I'm running right now would have probably cost $50,000.
Oh, really? Wow.
Today, you can get all of this for $5,000.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that barrier to entry has just made it so much easier to get into this. Now, depending on your show, at a very basic level, some podcasts like the plumber one we spoke about there, a good smartphone, which I'll hold up one of these right now, and then a great lapel mic, like a Rode lavalier, maybe a tripod, maybe a light. That'd be enough to get that show going. It really would. So we could say that a beginner setup you could put together today for maybe $500 if you've already got a phone. Now, going further than that, there's kind of a next tier up, and this is where you're maybe going to spend about $2,000. The things I would really recommend is a Logitech Brio webcam, which I'm going to pull one off my monitor because I've got one here.
Oh, so don't you have a camera on your computer?
I do. I have the one I'm shooting on right now is a Sony A6400, and that's where you go into more of the like full frame camera stuff.
Yeah, okay.
So that's where it gets a little bit more technically interesting. There's a few more buttons and things you have to navigate. But again, it's like I've mentioned in this already, like I'm a plumber, right? I didn't go to film school. I've never worked for Sony or at an audio visual company. With a YouTube tutorial and a couple of hours, I was able to work this out with no experience in cameras, just good resources and people around me. And I think anyone really can these days as well. So I don't think the barrier was necessarily technical know-how. It's just more like, I suppose, the wanting to go all in on something like this. And most podcasters will start simple and then work their way up.
Yeah, and what you touched on as well. I mean, YouTube. If if you need to find anything, I remember when we did a renovation 10 years ago. First thing we did was how to knock down a wall, how to put up a wall. YouTube, and it's such a great resource. So you're doing YouTube as well. I mean, let's sort of start to wrap it up a little bit. Now, the podcasting, is that being launched on YouTube as a YouTube channel
Okay,
also?
so the thing you have to really wrap your head around in the beginning is that because of Joe Rogan, some people, their podcast platform is YouTube. They don't use Apple Podcasts or Spotify. They use YouTube, and they might just have the video going and not be watching it. They might be engaged with it, like that. They use it as their player. And I've got stats to look at it. You can go on Rogan's channel or Valuetainment and see that people watch things. So I go, okay, well, if I'm thinking it about in that way, well, then it makes sense for me to make sure that my content is available on that platform if someone wanted to. So it's a really big thing. But this is where I find the unfair advantage of YouTube is. Yes, it's more work to do video, but YouTube is the second biggest search engine in the world. If you're making content that your audience wants to consume, solving those problems, hint, hint, like when people go onto YouTube and they're searching for things, it's such a unique way to be found based on the problem you solve for someone rather than just broadly in the podcast app store or in the Apple or iTunes store. So these search features are really a big advantage and why I'm so heavy on it. The other side of that is that YouTube's exploding. I notice in my own behavior, I watch a lot of YouTube. I love YouTube.
Absolutely.
I can't see that slowing down. So I really look at it and go, where is the future of this industry going? And that's where, which is why we're putting a lot of effort into it.
Fantastic. And Charlie, talk to us a little bit about what you do for people who are podcasting, and because there are the itty bitty things that get done, the editing and all of that. A lot of people don't either have the time or the skill to do it, and I know that's where you guys come in.
Yeah. So really the thing I would say here is like what we built was scratching my own itch. So when I started my first podcast, my dream was, right, I just want to record and then like throw the files at someone and then you got this. It's good.
It.
Like,
Yep. I'm done. Yes.
I don't want to make the artwork. I don't want to edit the video or the audio. I don't want to write the show notes or create the image or anything like that. And I don't want to make sure it's live. Like, I don't want to do any of that. I don't want to promote it. I don't want to make the social media clips. Like, I want someone else to do it. So the real, like, in a nutshell of what Valor Media does is like, we want to work with experts. We want to work with people that have got something to say, got the words to put into this microphone. And then I want to come and grab that and make sure it's found by the right people on the internet. Like, I want to distribute it and market it well so you have a great professionally looking podcast.
Yeah. And the last thing, Charlie, what do you have to say to people who probably think they're not the best in presenting and they don't have a great sort of, voice like Charlie does? What do you say to those people who sort of go, I'm not a great presenter. I'm not a great presenter when I stand up. I'm not really particularly great with audio and things like that. What are your words of wisdom or encouragement?
That's such a good question. We'll start with the voice thing. I'm cheating. I have an audio processor on.
I need one of those, not to sound like you, but
yeah, like like I'm sure we've all heard of like singers using auto tune on their CDs. Yeah, well, this technology is available to us. Like, if you want to sound like a radio host,
that's it.
It's not that hard anymore. So voice improvement stuff, if you're nervous about your voice, really cool. Cheryl, did you know if we log into our Zoom settings, we can actually touch up our appearance?
Yeah, I know that. I have more wrinkles than that you can actually see now. So,
well, I can
that
actually.
bit I know.
There's some red dots on my forehead at the moment because my son has clawed me this morning, and I'm like, that's the missing skin. But we'll leave that for now. The thing I would mention here is that like looks and sound and stuff is manipulatable, and a lot of people do this. So if you're truly uncomfortable with the way you look or feel, there's tools and things out there to do it. The second component is like I've never met anyone that came out of the womb and was like trained podcaster. Like it's a skill like any other thing. So if you want to be a runner, guess what you got to do? Run. Yeah. If you want to be good on video, what do you think you should do?
Go on video.
Yeah, exactly. So I look at this right now and like I've recorded like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of podcasts. And it is a skill. It is something you get better at, and it's through experience and education that is developed. Not, oh, you can do it or you can't. It's not, I'm 6'5" or I'm not. It's, okay, is this something I want to obtain and do? Am I serious about it? Well, then the chances are you can become great at it.
Absolutely. Have you gone back to look at your first few podcasts, and was it one of a cringing event? Like I've seen my first videos.
I pulled down all traces of it on the internet.
So that's a yes.
I
Yeah.
definitely. I was, and just to, I would cut people off. I would ask two questions at once. All right, I had this thing where I'd be like, "Oh, Cheryl, like, how did you get started in business? And also, what's your favorite way to generate leads?" And then it's like, which
Yeah.
question do they answer?
Yes. Yes.
So there's all
Yeah.
these little things you learn over time.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I know that I tend to do that as well. But it's one of those things where you're like, I can keep improving. You can keep improving. Like when I first did video, or even any Facebook Live, I was a blubbering mess. I didn't know how to sort of speak or ask the right questions. It's still improvement, but the whole point, like you're saying, is you just need to get out there.
It's a really interesting thing. I'll just mention one last thing I'll mention here. There's a CD I have, is an old audio from an old mentor of mine that I listen to like at least once a year. Now, his audio quality is terrible. I mean, terrible, right? It sounds like he recorded it like this, right? It sounds in a bathroom with echo and it's crazy. The volume's really low and he stutters and he goes, "Oh, no, no, I didn't mean to say that." And I'll say that again. But I listen to it all the time. And I'm not thinking about him for a second. I'm thinking about the information and how it can help me. So in this interview, do you think anyone's noticed that the way I speak or say or then, unless you've got something heavily criticizable or you're truly terrible at it, you'll find that most people are self-absorbed. They're trying to solve their own problems. And most people will put up with a lot if it's a problem worth solving. So again, great content will allow you to get away with a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something a coach of mine, and I know, mentioned as well. He says, it's put your ego aside. It's not about you. It's about the value that you're bringing.
You will get some interesting comments though. Like people have commented on my hairline. I'm like, yeah, I'm losing my hair. Like it's happening. I'm getting older. But like it doesn't bother me. You learn to go, okay, that's on them, not on me.
Well, that's it. But then you sort of go, well, you're obviously not listening to the value that I'm bringing, and you're focusing on the wrong things. But then you're like, well, I'm just going to put that aside. Everyone's going to have things that they like and things that they don't. So that's it, right? But thank you, Charlie. That's been fantastic. I love it. I will have to hit you up, and how do I get my podcast sort of launched as well?
Should do it.
Cringe, cringe. Do it, do it. Thank you so much for your time and sharing. It's been absolutely fabulous. I know that we'll be catching out outside of this as well. And I'd love to have you on again at some point, talking about other cool stuff, property or podcast wise as well.
Look forward to it.
Thank you. Thanks for joining me on Virtual Coffee, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Ciao, ciao. Bye, everyone.